So today we're gonna be explaining elemental reactions. Some will give you a damage, some will give you a shield, some will debuff the enemies, and some will give you some interesting other reactions. Since there is a lot of them, without wasting our time, let's begin with the first one. That would be Swirled. Swirled effect is used by Anemo users. In some cases, this ability will likely to gather the enemies around, which is helpful, but the most important bit is that it does spread your other abilities. For example, if you wanna apply, let's say, Pyro or any other element to more users, it will help to do that. It will also do a Swirl effect, and a Swirl effect in itself will do more damage. As you can see, it does a Swirled effect and it delivers the damage to other enemies. It does a big AoE damage, which is very useful if you wanna gather around enemies and deal massive AoE damage. The other reaction we're gonna talk about is gonna be a little bit less used, but that would be the Crystallize Geo. So if you use any of the elements except for Dendro and you use a Geo character, it will create these little shields that you can pick up. What kind of shield will it create will entirely depend on what kind of element you use. If you use fire together with Geo, it will create little fire shields, but in this case it created little hydro shields. It's not really that useful, but maybe in some niche cases you can find some use for it. The next elemental reaction we're gonna talk about is Vaporize, which is probably one of the most used ones. That would be when you apply water to the enemy and then use Pyro, it does a Vaporize damage. So what Vaporize does, it doubles your damage, and that's why it's one of the most used elemental reactions out there. All you have to do is just you have to apply water to Pyro or the other way around. However, do keep in mind, if first you apply Pyro and only then you apply Vaporized, you will get double the damage. But if you first apply the Hydro element and then you apply the Pyro element, you will still get extra damage, but it's gonna be times 1.5, not double. That is something to keep in mind. And so the next reaction we're gonna be talking about is gonna be Electro Charge. To Electro Charge the enemy, you wanna use on them a Hydro attack, and then on top of that you wanna use an Electro attack. So that would be Hydro plus Electro. What Electro Charge does is actually pretty simple, it just simply does damage over time. Nothing too crazy, pretty simple. So the next reaction we're gonna be talking about will be Melt. Melt works a bit similar to Vaporize, so what you need to do is to use Pyro and then Cryo, or you can do it the other way around and first use Cryo and then Pyro. The difference is, if you use the Ice ability first and then you put fire on top of it, once the enemy melts, it will be double the damage. But if you first apply Pyro and then on top of that you apply Cryo, it will be only 1.5 the damage. So it is better to first apply Cryo and only then apply Pyro. That will make more damage. It's not super duper wide used ability simply because there aren't that many characters that can utilize it very well. That's why Vaporize is a little bit better, because there are a huge amount of characters that can utilize Vaporize. Now next elemental reaction we're gonna talk about is gonna be Frozen. So what Frozen does, well, it doesn't really do anything in terms of damage or any resistances, but it will help you to gather enemies around. For example, if I use water and then I use this, they will freeze, right? There we go, you see? And now they are stuck together. All you have to do is to use Cryo plus Hydro and you get Frozen. Also, if you freeze your enemies and then use like a Great Sword or a plunging attack, it will shatter the enemies and it will deal extra damage. However, it's not that widely used because it requires very specific things, or you can use like a Geo attack on it to shatter enemies, but not that many people use it because it's very niche. The next one we're gonna talk on the list will be Overloaded. That will be Electro plus Pyro. What it does, it knocks back the enemies and it also deals an AoE damage. So all you have to do is to use Electro plus Pyro and it will do overloaded damage. As you can see, these guys are getting overloaded even without using anything because they are Pyro. And as you saw, it did knock them back and it did do an AoE damage. This is a pretty widely used reaction, but it also requires some specific characters. The next one we have on the list will be Superconduct. That will be Electro plus Cryo. What it does, it decreases the physical resistances of enemy by 40%, I believe. All you have to do is you have to apply both of them, and as you can see we superconducted them, and as soon as they get superconducted they get their physical resistances down. So this element can be pretty useful in the beginning of the game, especially when you don't have too many characters, because maybe you only have some physical characters, and that can definitely help you quite along the way. It definitely has some uses. It's not the most popular of reactions, but it has its uses. Next one we're gonna be talking about is burning Pyro. That will be when you apply Dendro and then you apply Pyro and it creates a burning element. What burning does is very simple. It simply burns and deals damage over time. Pretty simple, not super widely used, but it has its uses. The next one on the list is gonna be Bloom. Bloom is created by using Hydro plus Dendro. That creates little cores. These cores, when explode, will deal damage to enemies around them. They will explode after a certain amount of time or after reaching the maximum amount of them. So if we use Dendro and then we apply to them Hydro, as you can see these little cores are being created, and eventually they explode and deal damage. Now, if we create a little bit more of them, then we can start applying different kind of reactions, and one of them would be Hyper Bloom. Hyper Bloom is when you create one of these little cores and then you use Electro on them. As you can see, it created a Hyper Bloom. What it does, it immediately detonates those little cores and it sends them flying towards your enemies. And it also deals obviously increased damage. As you can see, we created a core, it exploded and it flew right into the enemy and it dealt more damage. This is one of the more widely used reactions. Now, if we do the same thing, but instead of Electro apply Pyro, it will create a Burgeron effect. It also detonates the cores, but instead of flying towards the enemies, it just does a massive AoE damage. Again, very widely used, just as the Hyper Bloom. Also very useful and very widely used. As you can see, all you have to do is create these little cores and then you have to use Pyro on them and you get Burgeron effect. The next one we're gonna talk about is gonna be Quicken effect. Quicken is created by using Dendro plus Electro. It creates Quicken effect. On its own it doesn't really do much, but it creates this little effect on these enemies if you use within certain time one of two elements, which is Electro or Dendro again. It will deal increased damage depending on which one you use again. If you use Dendro plus Electro and then you hit them once again with the Electro, it will do extra damage for your Electro character. However, if you use Dendro plus Electro and then you use Dendro once again, it will do more damage for your Dendro character. The first one is called Aggravate Electro and the other one is called Spread Dendro. Those are the last two effects that we're gonna talk about in this video. Now, if you're wondering which of these effects are being used the most and which one should you use, well, it entirely depends on what kind of characters do you have, because I have quite a little bit of few of them. I can choose a little bit. Also, I have characters like Nevulet, which is a must use, so it also in a way limits my options because I just have to use this guy, he's that good. But I would say one of the most used would be Vaporize. Swirl is obviously probably the most used, but that's simply because you can use Swirl with any element for exception of Dendro, and it has so many uses, it's so good. But as far as the damage goes, probably one of the most used would be Vaporize, Hyper Bloom, probably Burgeron Pyro, Overload can be used as well. But honestly, every kind of reaction can find its use. If it's used very specific in a niche, it can be even very good in that niche. Maybe only stuff like Shatter is kind of like not really useful anywhere, and Crystallize Geo, which creates you a shield, is also pretty useless for the most case. But any other reaction can find its use, so be sure to try them, explore them, see what kind of characters you have, what kind of reactions can you use, and just go from there. If I helped you, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment. And I'll see you guys next time. Take care.